What's up, everyone? Welcome to the very first video on the Combat and Canvas YouTube channel. I'm Brady. This is Max. We have started this to talk about all things combat sports. So, UFC, obviously PFL, that's what we're talking about today, Bellator, boxing, wrestling, whatever it is. And we also have a gaming channel, and that's in the description below. You can go to the gaming channel. Right now, we have some videos up of me doing UFC career mode, but we will have a ton of more gaming content around the combat sports genre. But also, you got to make sure, comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, share. Let's build this thing up. But today, we have an interesting one. We're kicking off our first video talking about PFL slash Bellator. They had an event against each other this past weekend, and it was certainly an event. So we're
Yeah,
going to get right into it. Let's talk about it. PFL versus Bellator over in Saudi Arabia.
champs versus champs.
Champs versus champs. Bellator dominated. Yeah, just what are you thinking about in general? Like, man, Bellator just came into PFL's territory for the most part. There was one PFL win, but came over and just wrecked them.
Yeah, to be fair, a lot of the PFL champions of this previous season weren't actually able to make this fight date, which is a little unfortunate. But I mean, the season did end up just like a few months ago, so that's pretty understandable. But yeah, man, Bellator just made a great showing of themselves, and a lot of the guys talked about they're bringing like the Bellator banner with pride, and they want to represent it well, show them that they really were the #2 organization when they still had their reign going on. And I think that they definitely showed that they have a lot of elite level fighters. And I think that even though it was bad in the sense that the PFL kind of got dominated, but a lot of the fighters got beat, but it doesn't really matter now. They're all under one banner now. So it's like, it's good for the PFL. Now all that talent is not on a competition, but now it's the assets. So I think that it's super valuable to have a much deeper talent pool now. And I think that they said this is going to be a annual thing. And I think that it was super, even though that Bellator dominated, there was still super fun fights. And I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, so we'll kick off. I'll just tell you. So AJ McKee, he got the win pretty easily,
Oh yeah.
dominated. Yoel
Dominated.
Ramiro picked up the win over Thiago Santos, which was a fight, certainly
Yeah,
a
it was
fight.
kind of a stinker.
Nemkov picked up the win. He looked good.
Bro, he looked up amazing, man.
Yeah,
He
he
looks
looked
great
really
at
good.
heavyweight. Like he looks like he filled out amazing. It's honestly insane how he used to make 205 looking at him now because he looks huge.
And then Jason Jackson picked up the win. He had a switch of opponents, but he ended up getting
Yeah.
the win.
Ray Cooper showed
Ray
out,
Cooper
but
just looked,
yeah,
yeah, it was.
he's not been looking good.
No, not at all. Impa and Johnny Emblem.
Now
Uh,
this is a good fight.
yeah, Impa was winning for a little bit there. I was like, oh man, this is getting interesting, but in the
Exactly.
end,
Yeah.
he didn't pick it up.
Impo is
Um,
one of the two PFL 2023 season champions. So honestly, the fights where it was actually real champion versus champion, it was honestly a lot more competitive than the other ones for the PFL. So that at least
yeah,
bodes well.
yeah, and then that takes us into the main event, which was another PFL champion, Renan Fedeta versus Ryan Bader, who's one of the, if not the biggest names for Bellator. And Renan Fedeta just ran through him, like knocked him out
Yeah,
in round one pretty early,
as we
easily. Like
expected.
it was brutal. This guy Renan, he's a monster, like unreal monster, and
Yeah, yeah,
he's so scary. Like
he really is, man.
and
He's just
then
one of the biggest guys and most athletic heavyweights you'll see. To be fair, Ryan Bader has been getting chinned for a
yeah,
few years now, but to do it on that biggest stage, it means that he rose to the occasion. And man, now he has a nice reward waiting for him, if you want to call it a reward.
yeah. So we'll get into that. So 2 days prior, um, one Mr. Francis Ngannou, who does have a boxing match coming up in
The
about like 2 weeks
Predator,
now. He's fighting Anthony Joshua in I believe like 2 weeks,
man, yeah,
and
that'll be a good one.
very good. But he's coming back to MMA after signing to PFL when he left UFC, then went to boxing, but he hasn't actually fought in PFL yet, but he is now. They have
Yeah,
announced
after he
not a
knocks
date or
AJ
anything.
out.
Yes, sir. We're rooting for the MMA guys. But so they haven't announced a date or anything, but they did say that Francis will get the winner of this main event between Renan and Ryan Bader. And I mean, Renan won. So now we know
Yep.
it's Francis Ngannou versus Renan Fededa, and that's going to be scary. Like one of
I
those dudes
mean,
are going to sleep early.
yeah, I mean, it's such an easy sell for the PFL too. I mean, just looking at the two guys, it's like looks like two absolute freaks of nature facing off. I'm like, the amount of muscle mass in there is going to be, I mean, something we haven't seen in since the USADA era. I mean, since pre-USADA in the UFC, where it was just dudes are absolutely massive every fight. And man, I just can't wait to see what they come up with the marketing and promoting it, because Francis is hopefully gonna get that KO, like we said. Hopefully, he beats Anthony Joshua, and then that'll just make the fight even bigger and bigger. So, I do think a lot of that fight depends on how Ngannou looks against AJ. If AJ
Yeah.
goes in and dominates him, it might take a little bit of the steam off of it. But I think we all know that what Francis is capable of after his last boxing outing. So, I mean, anything is possible at this point. So,
And
I think
I
that's
will
huge for the
say,
PFL.
that Renan is doing a good job at showing that he is a viable competitor because, like,
Oh yeah.
if he went out there and had an absolute shit show with Ryan Bader
Yeah.
and won, but won by decision or didn't really win some way, like,
I mean, yeah.
then you'd be like, what the heck? But this guy went out there and just slept him, and he's been doing it. So it's like, okay, now can he do this to Francis, who we know has done that to everyone else?
Yep.
That makes it a little more intriguing. So good on PFL for having a guy that's like, okay, we're actually interested in this fight
Yeah,
because
totally.
at, before him, before Renan, if you really think about it, who the hell
It
are
was
you going to
Kayla
put
Harrison.
Francis?
Yeah. Oh, not. I was saying the biggest
no,
star. Don't put Kayla in there.
no,
Don't put Kayla in there.
I was saying, like, other than him, like, who do you put in against Francis?
Yeah.
That would be an intriguing matchup, and there's really no one right now, but
I mean,
they made it
now,
intriguing.
I mean, if Ferreira didn't get it done, I mean, at least they have Nemkov, because I'm telling you, man, he's good, and he's going to be a
Yeah,
real problem for these heavyweights. But I think that we were talking about it earlier, how PFL kind of needed that new star, and
they got
Henan
him.
really, man, that was a star-making performance in their first pay-per-view, because he got him out of there in like 30 seconds. It was like the first shot he landed. Bader was on the floor, ground and pounded out. Man, he didn't even break a sweat. So that's how you show out.
And Kayla Harrison, of course, went to UFC because she is afraid of Francis Ngannou. Uh, I'm joking. But yeah, there was a another potential matchup for Francis Ngannou. I do this because will we see it happen? We don't know. But John
Hey,
Jones was in attendance at this event, and they actually brought him on the broadcast to talk. They had a little interview segment with him, and they were talking about possibly having John Jones versus Francis Ngannou. Now, John Jones said, "Yeah, I would like to fight. We want to see who's the baddest man. We'll do it." PFL then was like, "We want this too," and they were a little bit shady towards the UFC here.
dude,
He was like,
Sean
"So
O'Connell, man, Sean O'Connell.
yeah,
He was calling him out.
he was like, John Jones wants to fight, Francis wants to fight, PFL wants to fight. Makes you think there's only one thing standing in the way of making this fight. What could it be?
Man,
Shading UFC, obviously, because John Jones on the contract. So
dude,
a little bit of
great play.
shade thrown there
Dude, great play by the PFL. I know Sean O'Connell probably planned that, where they're like, John
for
is
sure.
here. Let's bring him in. Let's call out the UFC without kind of having to say their name. Everyone kind of got that was a call
Yeah.
out. Man, that was hilarious to see. And that's what they have to do, honestly. Just call out the UFC, man. I mean, that's the
Well, I
number one
ask,
competitor, so make them the villain.
wh- do so? Do you think UFC or specifically Dana
Yeah.
would ever entertain this,
I
especially after this. I
mean,
feel like Dana's petty, and he's gonna be like, "Oh, you want to shade us?" Like then now
yeah.
it's not happening ever. So I don't
Yeah,
think it'll ever happen
Dana is definitely driven a lot by his ego, so I don't think he's gonna want to admit that
for
he was
sure.
wrong in letting Francis Ngannou go. Because I remember he was telling everybody that, oh, he's gonna get destroyed by Tyson Fury.
And he did.
Anthony Joshua is not interested in gimmicky fights, and then
And
the
he
next
is.
fight he's fighting Anthony Joshua. So, man,
Uh,
I love that Francis keeps making Dana eat his words over and over again, but that also means that Dana's probably just gonna be
Even
more and
more
more,
petty.
yeah, even more
Yeah.
petty as the years go on. And I feel like the only way we ever see that is if John leaves the UFC. But I mean, I'm pretty sure his
Yeah.
contract's for a little bit longer now that he's back. So
John
I
Jones
don't know
probably
if
a
that'll
UFC
happen.
lifer.
Yeah, yeah.
And
He probably won't fight that much longer anyway. He wants to retire.
yeah, and John Jones did also say, I guess we mentioned that he would fight Ngannou, but then also throughout Stipe, obviously that's probably going to be the next fight, and Tom
Yeah,
Aspinall. He said
dude,
fans want me to fight Tom Aspinall. So
man.
a
I
lot of
love
people
how
thought that maybe the Stipe fight would be his last, but now if he's thinking about Tom, maybe we see it.
I know. I mean, yeah, I love that all the everyone in his ear chirping at him that he should fight Tom is working. I mean, he tried to sell Stipe still. He was like, the hardcore fans want me to fight Stipe, even though no one really wants to see that. I mean, it'd be kind of fun and like maybe if they're like not fighting for the belt, but yeah, I think that obviously Tom Aspinall is the next best thing, and then
He's the play.
obviously the lineal champion is still our boy Francis because he never lost a belt and he hasn't lost since. So hey, I wish it could
Friends,
happen, but I'm not sure it will.
in heavyweight MMA, no doubt about it, John Jones and Francis is the biggest possible fight to make over
Oh
any
yeah,
promotion at all.
one
Like,
hundred
there's no
percent.
one else bigger. And it sucks that we're probably, I'm not going to say 100% because nothing is ever 100%, but we're most likely probably never going to get that fight unless John goes over to PFL, which probably won't happen, or somehow Francis and Dana rekindle and Francis goes back to the UFC, which by that time is John Jones even going to be fighting? So
Yeah,
it's like,
I will
it
say
sucks that we're not gonna get it.
I think there's only one scenario where it happens where I think that the only time Dana is willing to work with someone he doesn't like, he worked with Showtime with Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather. Obviously, he probably didn't enjoy working with them, but he loved the money he got paid. So if Francis was to somehow beat Anthony Joshua in some spectacular fashion, come back, actually do well on pay-per-view against Renan Ferreira, then maybe I could see it. But those numbers would have to be through the roof because I'm
Yeah.
not sure how well. Obviously, we don't know how they did on their first pay per view, but I can't imagine it's anywhere near what the UFC does on just like a regular pay per view. But I mean, Francis is definitely the biggest star, so that's the only chance that happening.
Yeah, I agree, and that kinda takes us to our next point about the overall pay-per-view.
Yeah,
Now, we had some great moments. We had John Jones there, we had Francis there, we had Mike Tyson there, we had Ferreira get a huge knockout win in the main event, we had some fun fights, but do you think that this PFL card was worth the pay-per-view price, or should that have just been a regular card on ESPN Plus?
I mean, I always wish MMA was always more accessible and didn't have a paywall. So I honestly think that they would have been smarter to just been more of a showcase, put this on ESPN or something where
Yeah.
it's much more shown off and more people are able to get their eyes on it because realistically, I don't think that they're doing themselves any favors putting this on pay-per-view where this is kind of supposed to be the Super Bowl, like they were trying to say, but it's like it can't really be a Super Bowl if the PFL is not exactly a household name yet. So I think
Yeah.
first you need to become a household name, and then you can really start making money on pay per view. But I understand it's a business model for combat sports, so they kind of have to do it. But man, and they also weren't doing themselves any favors with most of the PFL's champions. We already talked about this, but most of the champions weren't actually able to make it so Impa and Renan Ferreira did pretty well, honestly, but the rest of the PFL fighters did not do great. So it honestly begs the question: should they think about changing the format of the season where it's not so taxing on them, where it's 4 fights if you win it all, and in 12 months? I mean, that we've seen it done, but doing that time and time again definitely is taxing on the body. And they also want to do Bellator versus PFL every year too. So I'm like, that's like basically 5 fights a year. And I'm like, that's kind of asking a lot for your champions to go in there against the toughest opponent after they just had a whole season of tough opponents and having to go back to back to back. So they're kind of putting themselves at a disadvantage, I think, having that format. So I think they should almost just go to a tournament format where
Yeah.
it's more straightforward instead of doing the whole regular season and playoff things. I like how they're standing out in that way, where it's like more of a there's a prize at the end of it. But I do think that it's hurting them where it's so much fights in one year. Everything has to go well. You can't get a cut. You can't get a cut, so there's no elbows. That they don't let elbows in the regular season. Thankfully, this card had elbows, which I
This card
thought was
had
very
elbows.
smart.
Very cool, but I also would like to mention that I think that not having elbows in the past kind of played a part because we didn't see that many. It
Yeah,
wasn't like we're really going for the elbows, and I think it's just a mental thing where they knew, like, "Oh, I can't
I
now,"
mean,
and it's like, "I can, but should I?" You
we
know
saw
what I'm saying?
elbows from the Bellator fighters, and
Yeah, Bellator, yeah.
but then the PFL fighters honestly didn't even seem like they knew how to defend against them as well. Because honestly, I'm like all the Bellator fight, like Johnny Eblam, he's honestly has nasty elbows, but he was finding Impa honestly like a lot, and I it makes you wonder without having that experience of guarding against those constantly when you're
Because they're probably not training it normally
exactly,
because it's not an issue.
exactly. It's like you might be having when you have an elbow guard on, but it's like that's not exactly the same phenomenon as getting hit on with straight bone to bone. So I do think that they should just make it straight up elbows. Whatever happens, happens, and shorten the season, or just make it a tournament format. Because right now, I think it's a little bit too much fights in one year, and then plus they want to do the Bellator versus PFL every year. So I think that that's just a little bit too much fights and too much variables where you don't want to spoil the big Super Bowl event, as they call it, because half of the champions aren't even going to be able to fight because they're injured.
And
That's what I
then
got to say.
another thing about this card is what I guess I wanna get your takes on. They had an amateur fight on the card, and
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah,
UFC would never have an amateur
yeah.
fight on the
We
card,
were chirping
and
about that.
so, is it cool that they're doing something different from the UFC, or is it really worth it to even have an amateur fight on your
Yeah,
card?
I don't think it's worth it at all. I think it just makes it kind of screams B team to me, where
Yeah,
we're having
that's what I think.
where yeah, we don't even have enough pros that we're trying to build up that we're actually shifting to amateurs and trying to build up them before they even go pro. So I definitely think that that was kind of a mistake, honestly. It was only the first fight of the night. Thankfully, it was all pros after that, but they have done that in the past where the
Yeah,
Muhammad
the Ali
Ali's
Walsh.
grandson, yeah, would be
Yeah,
having amateur fights randomly in the middle of the pro bouts. So I think they should go
yeah,
away from that. I mean, it's the professional fighting league, so I mean, it should be professional. I mean, I think that's
yeah.
in the name. So I mean,
Perfect example.
yeah. So maybe stick to that, and it'd be less confusing for the fans. Because I mean, when you see professional fighting league and the first fight is an amateur fight, it's kind of
You're
like,
like,
what am I being sold here? Why does it say pro? And then I turn it on, and it's like watching the NFL, and then you turn it on, and it's a high school game. I'd be like, why are you guys saying this is like the top level of the sport when it's really not?
yeah, and they're not even saying they're the B team. They're saying they're the co-leader. So
Yeah,
A1, A2, but you have amateur fights on here on a professional card. And then if you're a new viewer, like obviously we know we watch MMA, but if you're a new viewer, like, oh, maybe like you only watch UFC or maybe you have ESPN Plus and you're like, oh, let me tune into this. And you see an amateur fight and it's less time on the rounds. The rules are a little bit more constructed, and it's like, what am I watching here? Like, this isn't what I thought. And it's
exactly.
like, that's not really gonna bring eyes to your product, to be honest with you. Like, UFC has different things on Fight Pass where they'll have obviously, PFL doesn't have a Fight Pass or anything, but they'll have more lower level guys on Fight Pass. "Hey, you do good, boom, we'll put you in a Contender Series or a, something like that, and then bring you up." So maybe PFL needs, like, a separate thing to be like,
Yeah,
okay, here are these guys that are not the best right now, but they're going to build their way up. Then they can make it on these big cards. put an amateur straight on your biggest card
Yeah,
ever?
yeah.
Like, what are you doing?
And I'm like, PFL kind of has other series where they have PFL Europe. They had like the almost contender series thing to just get onto the season for some of the fighters. So they kind of have that. So I'm wondering, why would you put an amateur on the biggest card of the year when you have
Yeah,
all these other smaller events and series that it's like almost seen as like, okay, this is not the main attraction of PFL, but still a little side attraction. So why not put it on that instead of, you guys are trying to say it's the Super Bowl of combat sports? It's like, I don't know about that.
but I guess the question overall, was this worth the price of pay-per-view? My answer, no. I'm gonna
Yeah.
say no.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you. I think it, especially how there was basically two real champions from the PFL. I mean, they kept saying champ versus champ on the other ones, so it's like champions from the PFL from like 2 or 3 years ago, which hey,
Yeah,
they're still badass, don't get me wrong, but Ray Cooper is definitely not the Ray Cooper that we saw back when he was winning PFL titles, that's for sure. So I
yeah,
think
and
that
they
while
did
it was a
they did
good
give them a
break,
belt though. I'll
yeah,
say that,
I know, yeah, yeah, I know.
which
I will
was
say I like the little ring belt. That was kind of cool,
yeah.
but I do feel that they just need to honestly just stop with the whole PFL versus Bellator thing unless it's going to be the best of PFL, because I feel like it was almost like kind of disappointing, where it was like a lot of the fights weren't as competitive as they should have been. If I think that some of the guys from the last season in the PFL that won were actually fighting, I think it would have been a much better card, and maybe it
And
would have been worth it in that case. But in this case, I don't think so.
obviously obviously they can't help this, but there was supposed to be like Pitbull in the card. He got taken off because of some weight misses.
Yeah,
Bunch of different fights on the card that would like Michael was supposed to fight and he got taken off. Everyone there was like what 3 or 4 different fight changes and or completely just taken off the card. So it's like obviously they can't help that, but like on the PFL standpoint, are they working these guys too hard, like you mentioned before? Like, what's
yeah,
the issue here? And they need to have like I get it that they're different with the whole season and it makes it different from UFC and it's cool and all that, but if you're gonna do this, book the card a way away, let
yeah,
people get really, 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 really ready. Like make sure they're fully
yeah,
ready in camp. If injuries happen in camp, then okay, obviously they can't help that, but make sure everyone's good to go. Get the best of the best, actually the best of the best. And I know there was some issues with have they don't have the same divisions in some of the lower weight classes, but make sure that you have a card that's stacked. Like we want to see this Bellator guy versus this PFL guy, and this Bellator guy versus this PFL guy. Make sure it's actual fights we want to see because besides like the co-main and main,
yeah,
we could have won without it.
yeah, yeah, 100%. It was pretty one-sided besides those two.
Yeah, and I just think that PFL needs a strategy switch. The product's fine, the fighters are fine, they're
Yeah.
good, but it's like switch up that strategy, especially if you're going to keep doing this stuff. And now, do you have So, this is the confusing thing about the championship for me, like, with the Bellator just absolutely dominating your PFL guys, do they then go and dominate the seasons? Do you put a lot of Bellator guys in there now and have
Well,
them, like,
I think that
override?
if I'm not mistaken, they said that they still wanna have, like, the Bellator series, so it'd, like, almost be its own
Oh,
separate thing
yeah,
still.
you're right.
So,
You're right. Which is cool,
yeah,
but then when the Bellator guys are better than the
yeah,
PFL guys, it's like, do we care
yeah,
about the PFL guys
yeah,
now, or do we just wanna watch
yeah,
the Bellator? So
exactly,
maybe they do need to mix it.
exactly. I think that's where it's risky with this whole thing, where it's like you don't want it to be like boxing where there's a million different promotions, different names for belts, different types of
Yeah,
champions.
different
It's like
champions. Like,
just be one champion and one it's like it should almost be tournament winner or like season winner, like season champion, because it's like that's what it is in the PFL. So it's almost like it's just a
or
whole
even if you
different
did
setup.
I don't know if they're gonna do this or maybe, like, have the PFL and then the Bellator, and then the winners of each one then fight each other on another card like this
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
final.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure that the Bellator series will just be basically not like a season or whatever. I think it'll just be like them having cards. So I'm a little confused how Bellator is still kind of gonna exist almost,
Yeah.
where I thought that they kind of just combine all into the PFL. So I am kind of wondering where they're going with this and if that's a smart move because I think that they should really just build the PFL brand and leave Bellator in the past if I'm being 100%.
Yeah, you have all these fighters, put them under one brand,
Yeah,
have the
that's
best fight
why
the
the
best.
UFC is so well known. Is because for so long in the US, it was the UFC is the number one in MMA. The UFC is number one in pretty much no competition. I mean, Strikeforce and Bellator were decent like B teams, but no one was saying that they're the best. So I think that PFL, if they ever are going to be the best, it's like solidify and don't be having 20 different series where it's
And
just hard
then
for the fans to keep up.
and then, like, back in the day when UFC was buying other companies,
Yeah,
they weren't keeping it. It was
yeah.
UFC then.
Exactly. Like whenever they bought Pride, they said that they were going to keep Pride, but then that never really happened. And it's like that was probably smart for the UFC because
Yeah.
now if you ask just a casual fan, do they even know Pride? So I think that the PFL should just solidify them all. It's like still, if you want to have different series, I think they should have a tournament and then they should just have a regular PFL. Honestly, because I think the season was good enough to get them distinguished enough to build up from that. But now I think it's time to change, and they have enough talent where they don't need to kind of do a gimmicky format to bring in fans. I think the talent can speak for itself and maybe do a tournament, and that's kind of a way to distinguish them. But I think that the full season every year is just not doing them any favors where the talent they're not going to be able to showcase the top talent as much as they'd like to with just how much variables go into the sport with injuries, weight cutting, opponents pulling out. Sometimes it's not even a fighter's fault that they don't get the fight, it's their opponent. So you never know in MMA. So I think that there's way too many variables. There's a reason no other organization does a season format. So I think they've outgrown it. Honestly, it's not so much a detriment, but I think it's just like it's not working now with how much talent they have.
Yeah, it was a cool concept at the beginning, but now it's just like I don't even know what do like every other MMA show does. Do like UFC does. You have a
Yeah,
champion, the champion defends, you keep going. You don't need to have these tournaments. You don't need to have this stuff.
yeah,
They have now. Obviously, there's talent like a Kayla Harrison for PFL or a MVP for Bellator who have now left, and now they're going to UFC. So some of the big stars that they have are going over there, or some of the stars that they have
yeah,
are washed up guys from the UFC who have now come over here, like
yeah,
a Thiago Santos or like a Yoel Romero. And it's like, do you want to have stars? Do you want to build new stars? Then
yeah,
you're gonna have to have them hold that title. Be like, I'm the champ. Like this isn't no,
yeah,
I'm the 2023 champ. I'm the 2024 champ. No, I am the champion, and you're gonna have to beat me for it in order to take this.
yeah,
So it just
a hundred
convolutes
percent.
everything. Like if you're a new fan, you're like, wait, I thought this guy was the champion, but now it's like they're fighting for a new belt this year, and what the hell's going on? So it's
Yeah,
like, just make it,
a
just,
hundred percent.
just redo everything, make it regular.
Yeah, I think that's what they're gonna have to do if they want to kind of shift towards being more of a serious threat where yeah you got to build stars over time. It's like you can't restart every season and then your champion may not even really fight much at all. They may get injured in one of their fights and then they have zero chance of making the playoffs. So why would they even continue doing the regular season? And now they're not even you're not even able to promote that talent. So I think that there's a reason matchmaking is so important in combat sports where you got to face the guys at the right time. Otherwise, you could totally waste the talent, or not prepare a guy properly whenever they have a step up in competition. And then he just gets smoked because it's the hardest guy he's ever faced by far. So I think that they need to be more intentional now that they have all these stars and they can't just rely on the automatic matchmaking of a tournament. I mean, of a regular season And now I think they're going to have to start being more creative and intentional with who these guys are matching up against and who do they really want to promote. Because, I mean, there's a reason why the UFC got way more popular when Conor McGregor was fighting. I mean, stars are
Yeah,
what bring eyes to the sport. It's like the sport is great and the sport, it will always be fun to watch. But at the end of the day, people connect with people. So you need to have a star that people are going to be drawn to and want to see every time out, no matter what.
exactly. And it's just hopefully they can switch things up. Hopefully they can change it up a little bit and help their own product out.
Yeah, because
But
they're so close now that they have all these guys. Like we said, so deep now. They have a lot of talent.
yeah, it's just if you want to be co-leader, you got to change some stuff up. But overall, they have some decent fighters. Hopefully they get on the right track. And
Yeah.
the card was fine. Worth a pay-per-view? No, but the card was okay. It was
Yeah.
all right. They had some cool knockouts and finishes and some good fights, but not worth the pay-per-view price.
Yeah.
But
My final take
we
is the PFL still has a lot of potential, but they still have some work to do. But the future could be bright if they make the right move because, like I said, they're deep now. And if they can just build up some of these guys that they have now, they can really start competing.
100% agree. So that I guess that's where we're gonna end off. PFL, you got some work to do. Bellator, just keep dominating.
Yeah.
And Francis, good luck against Anthony Joshua. And then let's see when and where this takes place with Renan Fernandez because that's going to be a good one. We will see you next time. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Click the link in the bio, go to our gaming channel, subscribe
Hey,
and like, comment over there.
and if you guys want more of us, check out our podcast, MMA Today for No Smoke Sport,
Yes,
Spotify.
sir.
Check it out.
We go more in depth on cards, specific cards, UFC, all this good stuff. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Peace.